The Night Visitor. The countryside was peaceful that night, cloaked in the gentle sounds of rustling leaves and distant calls of crickets. For Aaron, that solitude was a welcome refuge. Life on his family's old farm had its quirks, chores that began at sunrise, unpredictable weather, and the sense of isolation from the bustling city life he'd left behind. But out here, beneath the endless sprawl of stars, he found a rare calm. It was something he'd needed for years, a way to shake off the weight of his past. Tonight, however, a faint tremor rippled through that stillness. As Aaron adjusted the crooked gatepost by the barn, he caught sight of a strange flicker in the sky, a greenish glow that streaked across the dark horizon. His first thought was a meteor, a common enough sight out here in the open fields. But this light didn't fade as meteors did. It grew brighter, descending with silent purpose until it vanished beyond a distant hill on his land. The silence after was heavy, as if even the crickets held their breath, sensing that something strange had arrived. Curiosity tugged at him, whispering questions. What if it was a military drone or some lost experimental aircraft? He knew well enough that such things weren't unheard of, but here, where nothing but endless fields stretched out in every direction, it felt odd. Still, his instincts nudged him to investigate. So, grabbing his flashlight and a rusty old rifle from the barn, he set out across the field, his steps firm but his pulse quickened by a hint of dread. As he drew closer to the site, the air felt warmer, carrying a peculiar scent, an odd mix of scorched metal and something sweet, like caramelized sugar. That sweet scent seemed to thicken the air, making him all the more wary. When he finally reached the hill and crested its edge, his flashlight beams swept over a strange scene. A deep crater marred the earth, with dirt and debris thrown up in chaotic arcs, and in its center lay a sleek, silver vessel, softly glowing under the stars. Its surface was smooth and unmarred by markings, other than a few scratches and dents that told of some violent entry through the atmosphere. The silence was profound, as if the very air held its breath. Aaron approached cautiously, keeping his flashlight steady as he scanned for any signs of movement. But before he could process what he was looking at, he noticed a figure slumped against a silver hull, a person or something very close to one. He froze, rifle at the ready, unsure if he was dealing with an injured person or something more dangerous. But as the figure stirred, lifting a hand to shield her eyes from the beam of his flashlight, he saw something remarkable. Her skin glowed faintly, an ethereal green that almost seemed to shimmer like polished stone. Long silken hair cascaded over her shoulders, and when she opened her eyes, they were a striking violet, filled with something deeper than fear, perhaps exhaustion, perhaps desperation. She tried to speak, but her words came out as lilting, melodic sounds, unintelligible yet rich with meaning. Aaron lowered his rifle slightly, unsure what to do that compelled to help. The woman, if that was indeed what she was, clutched her shoulder, where a deep gash blurred an unfamiliar shade of blue. Without thinking, he reached out to steady her, and she flinched at his touch, eyes widening with an emotion he couldn't quite read. "Hey," he said softly, though he knew she wouldn't understand his words. "You're hurt, I can help." To his surprise, she nodded, as if understanding the intent rather than the language. With care, Aaron supported her weight, her skin cool beneath his hands, and together they made their way back to his barn. The journey was slow, every step a calculated risk. He felt exposed in the open fields, his mind racing with possibilities. If this being was real, if she was here on his farm, then others might follow. And that thought chilled him more than he cared to admit. Once inside the barn, he set her down on an old wooden bench, the light dim and dusty around them. She observed the rustic surroundings with wide eyes, taking in every detail as though she were cataloging each item in her mind. Aaron couldn't help but feel self-conscious about the simple barn, its rough wooden beams and scattered tools seeming almost primitive under her penetrating gaze. He rummaged through a nearby cabinet for an old first aid kit, glancing back to see her eyes following his every movement. When he returned, he carefully pulled out a roll of gauze and some antiseptic, hoping that whatever he did wouldn't make things worse. "This might sting," he murmured, though he knew she wouldn't understand. As he applied the antiseptic, she winced but held still, her violet eyes studying him with an intensity that made him feel as though he were the alien here, rather than her. He noticed her markings begin to glow slightly, shifting colors with each touch, perhaps in response to the antiseptic or maybe even his presence. The wound took on an eerie glow, and though he wasn't sure if his methods were effective, he was struck by the resilience she displayed, sitting silent and watchful, enduring his makeshift medical care. Once he finished, she leaned back against the wall, visibly exhausted but more at ease. Silence hung between them, thick and uncertain. Then, with a voice soft and musical, she spoke a single word, stumbling through its foreign shapes with great effort. "Earth." Her voice, though barely audible, was laced with wonder and curiosity. He nodded. "Yes, Earth," he replied, as if saying the word would make her situation any less strange. She stared at him, her eyes filled with relief and something else, perhaps hope. After a long pause, she managed to say her name, her voice almost a whisper. "Astra." Aaron let the name hang in the air for a moment, feeling its strangeness yet fitting sound. "Astra," he repeated, committing it to memory as if it were the most important thing he'd ever heard. For the next few moments, they sat in silence, each one processing the surreal situation in their own way. Astra finally looked down, her brow furrowed as she appeared to struggle with the language barrier. After a moment of contemplation, she took a deep breath and spoke haltingly in broken English. "Danger. Follow me." Aaron's stomach tightened. He didn't need her to say more to understand the seriousness of her words. Whatever trouble had brought her here, it wasn't over. He nodded, standing and grabbing his rifle again, readying himself to protect her and his home. But as he looked back at Astra, seated on his dusty bench, with her otherworldly glow and eyes full of worry, he felt something deeper, a sense of purpose, as if their paths were meant to cross. And though he didn't know what awaited them, he knew that he couldn't turn his back on her. "Don't worry," he said, though his own heart pounded with uncertainty. "We'll figure this out, Astra. You're safe here for now." Outside, the night remained quiet, but he sensed that this peace was only temporary. For in that moment, under the dim lights of his barn, he knew his life had been irrevocably changed. And somewhere, not far off, shadows gathered, following the trail of a fleeing star, a star that had fallen straight into his life. Shadows in the cornfields. Morning arrived slowly over the farm, bringing with it a gentle golden light that slipped through the cracks of the old barn and cast soft rays across the figure resting inside. Astra lay still on the makeshift bed of hay Aaron had prepared for her, her form barely visible beneath a blanket he'd found. He hadn't slept at all, instead spending the night watching the skies, listening for any sign of pursuit, his rifle leaning against the wall within easy reach. The morning's stillness was deceptive. It felt calm, but only on the surface. Aaron couldn't shake the feeling that whatever Astra was running from was closer than it seemed. She had said the word danger with such urgency that he knew it was no small threat. His own heart beat with a nervous anticipation, as though he could feel the weight of the unknown pressing in on his home. Out here, he thought he had left the dangers of the world behind. But now, a stranger from the stars had brought her troubles to his doorstep. As he leaned against the barn wall, the faint sound of footsteps behind him caused him to turn. Astra was awake, her violet eyes wide and alert. She looked more cautious now, as if the quiet surroundings had lulled her into a temporary calm, but hadn't erased the fear she carried with her. "Good morning," he said softly, trying not to startle her. She managed a small nod and then looked out over the fields, her gaze lingering on the vast openness. Aaron guessed that in her world, there was nothing quite like this. Endless stretches of corn swaying gently in the breeze, golden sunlight illuminating a peaceful landscape that belied any hint of the threat they both knew was coming. "Did you sleep well?" he asked, his voice low. Astra paused, struggling to find the right words. "Sleep, strange," she replied in halting English. Her accent was lilting soft, each word spoken as though it were new to her. He managed a small smile. "That's understandable. I don't imagine you're used to barns." She shook her head, the slightest hint of a smile touching her lips before fading. Then her expression grew serious, and she pointed towards the horizon. "Come," she said, her voice strained, eyes scanning the distance as if expecting shadows to rise from the fields. Aaron followed her gaze, his stomach twisting at the thought of what might be out there. He'd never seen a spaceship before last night, nor met anyone who had. But now he was bracing for the arrival of an enemy force from the stars. The weight of the situation settled over him, and he felt a responsibility he hadn't anticipated, a commitment to protect her no matter what. "Who are they?" he asked, keeping his tone gentle, hoping she could explain. Astra's eyes filled with a sadness that ran deep, like old wounds that had yet to heal. "Felon," she said, her voice low. "Empire. They control many worlds, take many people." He nodded slowly, trying to imagine it. "They're after you." "Yes," she replied, the word heavy. She looked down, her hands fidgeting as if her own words were too painful to bear. "I am a leader, or was." Aaron's eyes widened as he began to piece it together. "You're royalty." Astra nodded, though there was no pride in the gesture, only a resigned acceptance, as though the title meant little to her now. "They want control. I escape. They follow." In that moment, he saw her not just as an alien, but as a person carrying a burden too heavy for one soul. She was no stranger to sacrifice or danger. Somehow, that made him all the more determined to help her. The weight of her troubles was enormous, and she needed someone willing to stand beside her. "I'll help you," he said firmly, meeting her eyes. "You're safe here, for as long as I can keep you safe." Astra looked at him, her expression a mixture of relief and doubt. She was unused to trust, that much was clear, but she nodded, as though she wanted to believe him. Before either of them could say more, a distant rumble reached their ears, faint yet unmistakable. Aaron's heart stopped. He had hoped for more time, days maybe, to plan and fortify. But now it seemed that the Felon forces had wasted no time in closing in. He grabbed his rifle and motioned for Astra to follow him. They moved swiftly through the barn, ducking into the nearby cornfields, the dense stalks offering a veil of cover. The sound grew louder, a low, rhythmic hum that sent chills down Aaron's spine. It wasn't a truck or a plane. It was quieter, more deliberate, like a machine designed to hunt. Astra moved through the rows with surprising agility, her every step silent, as if her very essence allowed her to blend seamlessly into her surroundings. Aaron led her toward the far side of the field where he knew an old hunting blind was hidden among the trees. They slipped inside, crouching together in the cramped space, and peered out over the fields. The corn rustled gently in the breeze, and for a moment, the world seemed peaceful. But then, over the edge of the hill, 3 sleek, dark shapes appeared, moving low and fast across the landscape. Each one was like a dark blade cutting through the air, silent and precise. They descended upon his farm like shadows, hovering above the earth with an eerie grace that belied their lethal purpose. Aaron gritted his teeth, his heart pounding. These weren't simple drones or scouts. They were purpose-built, designed to seek and capture. He glanced at Astra, whose markings glowed faintly in the dim light of the blind. She was watching the ships with a look of grim resignation, as though she knew escape was a long shot. "They're here for you," he whispered, tightening his grip on his rifle. "How do we stop them?" Astra shook her head slowly. "They strong. Many weapons." She looked at him, a softness in her eyes that spoke of regret. "You should leave." Aaron's jaw tightened. "Not a chance. You're my guest now. We'll figure this out." He could see the disbelief in her gaze, but there was no time to argue. One of the ships descended lower, and Aaron caught a glimpse of figures inside, armored soldiers with sleek weapons at their sides. His mind raced, recalling every ounce of training and experience he had, trying to calculate their chances. As he studied the soldiers, a thought struck him. He motioned to Astra, pointing to the corn stalks surrounding them. If we can lead them through the field, maybe we can slow them down, force them to separate. She looked at him, surprised by the suggestion, but nodded in understanding. Together, they slipped from the blind and crept back into the field, moving carefully to avoid detection. The steady hum of the ships above filled the air, a constant reminder of the danger surrounding them. They reached a section of the field that Aaron knew well, dense and tangled, a place where any outsider would struggle to find their way. He crouched beside Astra, gesturing for her to stay low. She followed his lead, her violet eyes scanning their surroundings with the precision of a seasoned warrior. The ships circled above, and then, as if sensing their movement, one descended closer to the ground. Aaron's heart raced as he motioned for Astra to stay behind him. A soldier dropped down from the ship, landing with airy silence just a few yards away. The figure was tall, cloaked in dark armor that seemed to ripple and shift like shadows in the night. Aaron watched, holding his breath, waiting for the right moment. Then, in a swift motion, he raised his rifle and aimed, knowing he had only one chance. He fired, and the shot echoed across the field, cutting through the silence. The soldier staggered, caught off guard, and Astra seized the opportunity, lunging forward with a swift, fluid movement. She struck with a precision that left Aaron stunned, her strength and speed far beyond anything he could have imagined. The soldier crumpled to the ground, and for a brief, triumphant moment, they exchanged a look of victory. But the respite was short-lived. More soldiers began to drop from the other ships, their dark forms moving methodically, like shadows drawn to their quarry. "We need to move," Aaron urged, pulling Astra forward. They weaved through the corn, ducking and dodging as the felon soldiers closed in, relentless in their pursuit. Breathless, they finally reached the edge of the field, and Aaron spotted an old storm cellar hidden beneath a pile of brush. He yanked the door open, ushering Astra inside. She slipped through, and he followed, sealing the door above them, just as a flash of light illuminated the field outside, signaling the arrival of more soldiers. Inside the cellar, darkness enveloped them, the only sound their ragged breathing. Aaron turned to Astra, his voice a hoarse whisper. "We'll figure something out," he said, though he knew the odds were stacked against them. "I promised I'd help you, and I meant it." Astra met his gaze, her eyes softening as she nodded. For the first time, a glimmer of hope flickered in her expression, and in that moment, they both understood that the fight for freedom had only just begun. A plan in the shadows. The cellar was dark and cramped, its low ceiling pressing down on Aaron and Astra as they crouched together in the silence. Dust floated through the dim beam of Aaron's flashlight, illuminating stacks of old crates and forgotten supplies left behind by his grandfather. It smelled of earth and damp wood, a stark contrast to the high-tech precision of the Phelan Empire looming just above them. Astra sat beside him, her glowing markings dim but still casting a faint light around them. Her expression was tense, her eyes fixed on the door as if expecting it to burst open at any moment. For the first time, Aaron saw her as something more than just an alien on the run. She was a leader, a royal on the brink of capture, and yet utterly focused, weighing options, calculating risks. There was a steeliness to her that reminded him of the soldiers he'd once fought beside, those who carried on despite the odds stacked against them. "They will search," she murmured, her voice low and steady. "Phelan does not give up." Aaron nodded, running a hand through his hair, trying to think. "So how do we keep them from finding us?" Astra's brow furrowed in thought. "We hide," she replied simply. "But they have technology. Track heat, detect energy." Her English was broken, but she managed to get the point across. Need, distraction. Aaron glanced around the cellar, his mind racing. Distraction. All right, he said, taking a deep breath. I have some old hunting gear, maybe enough to create a false trail. If they're tracking us by heat or movement, we might be able to buy ourselves some time. Astra tilted her head, her violet eyes brightening with a glimmer of hope. Yes, yes. Delay them. Make them look wrong way. Aaron rummaged through the dusty crates, pulling out an old propane heater, some flares, and anything that could create a heat signature. If I can set these up in the fields and along the creek, it'll look like we're trying to escape toward the hills, he explained, his tone focused. She nodded, her gaze softening as she watched him work. Despite the fear and exhaustion, a faint smile tugged at her lips. You are brave, she said quietly, the words seeming almost foreign to her. Most would leave me. Aaron paused, looking at her, the reality of the situation settling over him. He'd never considered himself a hero, just someone trying to live a quiet life. But now, facing this incredible challenge, he couldn't bring himself to abandon her. You didn't ask to be here, Astra, he said simply, and I'm not going to let you face this alone. Her smile faded, and she gave him a sullen nod. Felon, they are ruthless, she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. I have seen them destroy entire worlds. They took my family, my people. Aaron clenched his jaw, his anger flaring at the thought of anyone trying to erase someone as unique and resilient as Astra. He placed a hand on her shoulder, giving her a reassuring squeeze. Then we'll make sure they don't take you. Without another word, he gathered the makeshift heat sources and cracked open the cellar door, listening for any sound from above. It was quiet, but he knew they didn't have much time. He looked back at Astra. Stay here. I'll set these up and be back soon. Astra's gaze was steady. Be careful. He gave her a nod before slipping out, his movements precise and cautious. He wove through the cornfield, crouching low to avoid detection, and set up the heater and flares along the path leading toward the hills. Each time he placed one, he activated it, hoping the Felon technology would pick up the false heat signatures. Once finished, he returned to the cellar, ducking inside and sealing the door behind him. Astra looked up as he re-entered, her expression a mixture of relief and gratitude. Good. Planned, she said softly. Hope it works. They sat in silence, waiting. Outside, the hum of Felon ships grew louder, their shadows passing over the field above searching. Aaron's heart raced with each pass, his grip tight on the rifle in his lap. But after what felt like an eternity, the sound began to recede, the ships veering away from the farmhouse, following the false trail toward the hills. Astra exhaled, her shoulders sagging with relief. They gone. Aaron nodded, though he kept his voice low. For now. It bought us time, but they'll be back once they realize we're not there. We'll need a better plan before they come looking again. Astra looked down, lost in thought. I need to contact my people, she said finally. If I can reach them, they might send help. Aaron thought about it, weighing the risks. I have an old radio tower, he offered, but it's primitive. I don't know if it's strong enough to reach anyone out there. Her eyes lit up with a flicker of hope. Can try. Anything is better than waiting here. He nodded. All right. The tower's on the north side of the property. We'll have to go on foot, stay low, and keep quiet. If they're still scanning, we don't want to give them anything to follow. Astra nodded, determination hardening her features. Lead, I follow. They climbed out of the cellar, moving through the dense cornfields toward the tower in silence. Aaron kept his rifle close, his senses alert. Every rustle of leaves, every distant call of a bird seemed amplified, and he wondered how many other creatures lurked unseen in the shadows. They reached the tower as the sun began to set, its silhouette looming like a skeletal sentinel against the orange sky. Aaron gestured for Astra to climb the narrow ladder first. She moved with a grace and agility that belied her injuries, scaling the rungs quickly, and he followed close behind. At the top, they ducked beneath the rusted metal frame, and Aaron fired up the old radio, its knobs creaking as he adjusted the frequency. Astra knelt beside him, her fingers hovering over the controls, her expression tense as she took in the ancient technology. "This, different," she murmured, trying to make sense of the strange machine. She leaned closer, focusing intently as the static-filled hum filled the air. "If I transmit signal, Fallon may detect, but have to try." Aaron nodded, understanding the risk. "I'll cover you, just make it quick." With a nod, she began to adjust the frequency, her fingers moving with practiced precision as she navigated the foreign device. The static crackled, and then, with a faint whine, the signal stabilized. Astra spoke in her native tongue, her voice low and urgent, each syllable carrying a depth of meaning he could only guess at. For a moment, her markings brightened, glowing with an inner strength that reminded him of the stars themselves. But the transmission was short-lived. Before she could finish, a sharp beep echoed from the radio, and she froze, her eyes widening in alarm. "Felon, trace," she whispered, her voice laced with panic. Aaron acted on instinct, yanking the radio's power cord and silencing the signal, but it was too late. In the distance, the low hum of engines grew louder, more intense, closing in on their location. "Run," he whispered, grabbing her hand and pulling her down the ladder. They hit the ground running, weaving through the fields as the Felon ships descended, their beams sweeping across the crops, cutting through the twilight like searchlights. Astra's breathing was labored, and Aaron knew her wound was slowing her down. Still, she kept pace, her determination shining through her exhaustion. Ahead, the barn loomed, offering a brief sanctuary. They ducked inside, pressing their backs to the wall as the Felon soldiers scoured the area outside. The heavy footsteps of the soldiers drew closer, and Aaron could hear the faint buzz of their high-tech weaponry charging up. Astra looked at him, her face pale but resolute. "We fight." Aaron shook his head, his mind racing. "Not here. Too close to the house. There's a stream that leads into the woods. If we can reach it, we might be able to lose them." She nodded, following his lead as they crept through the barn's shadows and slipped out the back. They moved quickly toward the stream, their steps silent and deliberate, leaving no trace behind. The Felon's soldiers' voices grew faint as the two fugitives entered the woods, the thick trees closing around them like a protective shield. The sun had set by the time they reached a small clearing by the water, its surface reflecting the last light of day. Astra leaned against a tree, her breaths ragged, her markings dimming as exhaustion took hold. Aaron knelt beside her, his voice soft. "We'll be safe here for the night. In the morning, we'll come up with another plan." Astra nodded, though her gaze was distant, as if her thoughts were far away. She looked at him, her violet eyes filled with gratitude. "You have done more than expected," she whispered, her words trembling. Aaron smiled, though it held a hint of sadness. "I couldn't just leave you. We're in this together now." She nodded, and for the first time, her hand found his, a gesture of trust and solidarity that transcended words. In that quiet moment, as the stars began to emerge above, Aaron knew that he was no longer protecting her out of duty alone. Their fates were intertwined, bound by a shared determination to survive. And as they sat in the shadows of the forest, the Thalen Empire looming close yet momentarily out of reach, Aaron felt a new resolve forming within him, a fire that would not be extinguished, no matter what came next. The escape plan. The woods were dark and quiet, casting a thick veil around Aaron and Astra as they sat by the stream, hidden from the Thalen soldiers scouring the fields they had just escaped. The stream bubbled quietly, its gentle sound offering a strange sense of calm after the chaos that had nearly overtaken them. Aaron could feel the weight of the night's events settling over him, every muscle in his body tense and aching. But Astra, beside him, looked even worse, her face pale, her breathing shallow. The energy that had once pulsed from her markings now flickered faintly, like a dying ember. Aaron knew they couldn't keep running indefinitely. They needed a plan, something more than hiding and evading. And as he looked at Astra, he felt a renewed sense of determination rise within him. She had fought long enough, and he would do everything he could to help her break free from the felon's grip. "Astra," he said softly, trying not to startle her. She turned to him, her violet eyes heavy with exhaustion, but still filled with that unbreakable resolve he had come to admire. "We can't keep running like this. They'll eventually catch up, and I'm not letting them take you." She nodded, understanding the reality of their situation. "Yes," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I know. Phelan will keep searching." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "But if I can reach a port, I might escape." Aaron frowned, thinking. "A port? Like a spaceport?" "Yes," she nodded, looking away, as if ashamed of needing such help. "A place with ship's technology. If I can get off Earth, I can evade them." He processed this, knowing the nearest military base was still miles away and heavily guarded. "The nearest base is a long way off," he murmured. "But I know some routes that might help us get close enough. Maybe we can figure out a way in once we're there." Astra's expression shifted, the faintest spark of hope lighting her face. "You would risk it." "Of course," Aaron replied, meeting her gaze. "I said I'd help you, and I meant it. We'll figure it out together." She looked down, and for a moment, Aaron thought she might cry. But she quickly masked her emotions, giving him a nod of gratitude. "Thank you, Aaron," she said softly, the words almost a whisper, as though they were too fragile for the weight of the night's dangers. They spent the rest of the night hidden in the forest, strategizing in low whispers, outlining their path toward the military base. Aaron described the surrounding terrain, every dirt road and back trail he had learned from years of hunting and hiking. Astra listened intently, absorbing each detail, her focus unwavering despite her exhaustion. As dawn crept over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of soft pink and gold, they set off through the forest, moving quietly along the stream's edge. Aaron led the way, his senses honed by years spent navigating these woods. Astra followed close behind, her movements as silent as a shadow. Her alien grace was captivating, and Aaron couldn't help but be struck by how naturally she adapted to her surroundings. She was otherworldly, yet somehow more grounded than anyone he had ever known. Hours passed as they wound through the forest, the distant sounds of Phelan ships still audible in the sky above. Aaron kept them hidden beneath the canopy, relying on every ounce of his knowledge to keep them off the Phelan's radar, but he knew their window of opportunity was closing fast. They had to reach the base before the Phelan soldiers realized they'd been outmaneuvered. By midday, they emerged from the dense trees onto a dirt road that wound toward the military outpost. They ducked behind a fallen log, crouching low as Aaron surveyed the area. "This road leads straight to the base," he whispered. "It's a small outpost, but they'll have a radio system that could help us contact your people." Astra nodded, her face set with determination. "I can handle the radio," she replied, her English more confident after hours of practice. "But we must avoid guards." Aaron looked at her, impressed by her bravery. "I'll handle the guards," he said, gripping his rifle. "You focus on getting the message out. But once we're inside, we'll need to move quickly. They won't be too friendly to unexpected visitors." Astra managed a faint smile, her markings brightening slightly. "Agreed." They waited hidden as the road remained quiet. Finally, with the sun casting long shadows over the landscape, Aaron led them toward the base. The perimeter fence loomed before them, barbed wire glinting in the afternoon light. Aaron scanned the area, spotting a section where the fence dipped lower, weakened by years of neglect. He knelt down, lifting the bottom of the fence, motioning for Astra to crawl through. She slipped under, and he followed close behind. Once inside, they kept low, moving from shadow to shadow, avoiding the guards patrolling the outer buildings. The outpost was mostly quiet, only a few soldiers milling about. Aaron guessed it was one of the more remote installations, lightly staffed and underfunded. Lucky for them. Astra pointed toward a building with a tall antenna mounted on its roof. "Radio there," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. Aaron nodded, his mind racing as he formulated a plan. "I'll create a distraction," he said. "Draw the guards away. You head straight for the radio room, send your message, and get out fast." Astra's eyes met his, and for a brief moment he saw a depth of gratitude and fear that mirrored his own emotions. "I understand," she replied, her voice steady despite the tension. He motioned for her to stay hidden, then slipped around the side of the building, making his way toward the entrance. He spotted a group of crates stacked nearby, and with a swift kick, he sent them crashing to the ground. The noise echoed through the quiet outpost, and within moments, 2 guards rushed toward the commotion. Aaron took a deep breath, stepping out from the shadows. "Hey," he called, waving them over. The guards froze, surprise flickering across their faces, but they quickly moved to detain him. Aaron feigned a struggle, drawing their attention away from Astra's approach. As he wrestled with the guards, he glanced over his shoulder, catching a glimpse of her slipping into the radio building undetected. Inside the radio room, Astra moved quickly, her hands gliding over the controls with ease. She adjusted the frequency, her fingers flying as she entered the codes she needed to reach her people. The machine hummed to life, and she spoke in her native tongue, her voice low and urgent, each word carrying the weight of her plea for rescue. Outside, Aaron continued to struggle with the guards, keeping them occupied as long as he could. But more guards had started to arrive, alerted by the disturbance. He was outnumbered, and he knew his time was running out. Just as one guard reached for his radio to call for reinforcements, a voice crackled over the speakers. It was Astra's voice, clear and commanding, resonating through the outpost's PA system. "Felon soldiers approaching Earth," she declared, her voice unyielding. "This is a warning. Humanity is not alone. We will fight." The guards froze, their attention momentarily diverted as they listened to her message. Astra's voice continued, a rallying cry echoing through the outpost, challenging the Felon's power and declaring her people's resistance. Aaron took advantage of their distraction, breaking free from the guard's grip and darting toward the radio building. Inside, he found Astra standing by the transmitter, her face lit with a fierce determination. "We have to go," he urged, grabbing her hand as the sound of footsteps approached. Together, they sprinted through the building, ducking through corridors and weaving around equipment. The guards' shouts grew louder as they pursued, their footsteps echoing through the narrow halls. Aaron led Astra toward the back of the building, where an emergency exit loomed ahead. They burst through the door, skidding to a halt in the open air, the night stretching out before them like a dark, endless canvas. They sprinted toward the perimeter fence, the sounds of pursuit fading behind them. They slipped under the fence just as the floodlights flared to life, casting stark shadows over the landscape. Aaron kept his grip tight on Astra's hand, pulling her forward as they raced into the forest, the cover of darkness their only protection. As they ran, the adrenaline pounding in his veins, Aaron glanced back, catching a glimpse of the Felon ships hovering in the distance, their lights sweeping over the earth like cold, unfeeling eyes. He knew they had little time before the Felon Empire would respond to Astra's message. But for now, they had gained a precious advantage. Her people had heard her call. They didn't stop until they were deep within the forest, the trees closing around them in a protective embrace. Aaron slowed, breathing heavily, his heart racing. Astra sank to her knees, her face pale but triumphant. "You did it," he said, his voice filled with awe. "They heard you." She looked up at him, a weary smile breaking through her exhaustion. "Yes," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "They know. Now, they will come." Aaron knelt beside her, resting a hand on her shoulder. "You're one of the bravest people I've ever met, Astra. You stood up to an empire. You sent a message to the stars." She met his gaze, her eyes shining with gratitude and resolve. "And you risked everything to help me," she replied softly. "Thank you, Aaron, for believing." They sat in silence, their breaths evening out as the forest enveloped them in its quiet peace. Though they knew the Phelan Empire would not back down easily, for the first time, a sliver of hope had taken root within them. And as the stars began to dot the sky above, Aaron felt a renewed sense of purpose. This fight was no longer just about survival, it was about freedom, about standing against those who sought to control and destroy. With Astra by his side, he knew they would face whatever came next together. An ally from the stars. The forest was still and dark as Aaron and Astra found shelter beneath the thick canopy of trees. The only sounds were the rustle of leaves and the occasional hoot of an owl hidden somewhere in the darkness. They had found a hollowed-out tree, wide enough for them both to fit, and nestled inside, catching their breaths after the daring escape from the military outpost. But Aaron knew they couldn't stay hidden for long. Astra's message had reached a people, but it had also signaled the Phelan Empire. Astra leaned back against the tree, her face wary but resolute, the faint glow of her markings casting soft light over her features. Despite the exhaustion evident in her posture, her eyes held an intense spark, a reflection of the hope she had fought to regain. "Did you think they heard you?" Aaron asked, breaking the silence. Astra nodded, her gaze distant. "Yes, they will come," she replied, her voice strong despite her exhaustion. "But they must be careful. Phelan Empire will be prepared." Aaron frowned, worry gnawing at him. "How long do you think it'll take them to get here?" Astra considered this, her eyes narrowing in thought. "They will be cautious. Perhaps 2 days." She looked up at him, her expression serious. "We must survive until then." Aaron nodded, determination solidifying within him. He knew the next 48 hours would be a test of their strength and resolve, with the Phelan Empire closing in and only the shadows of the forest as their shield. But they had already faced impossible odds, and each challenge had only made them more resourceful, more resilient. Just as Aaron was about to suggest a plan for setting up more distractions and cover, a faint, unfamiliar hum cut through the night air. It was barely discernible, but the pitch and rhythm were different from the Phelan ships they'd encountered. Astra's eyes widened as she straightened, her gaze snapping to the sky. "That sound," she whispered, hope flickering in her eyes. Aaron listened intently, and soon the hum grew louder, its source approaching quickly. The sound was smoother, less menacing, and as he looked up, he caught a glimpse of a small, sleek craft descending through the trees, its silver hull reflecting the moonlight. It was graceful, silent save for the faint hum, and it moved with a precision that spoke of advanced technology. Astra's eyes filled with recognition and relief. "That is my people." The craft settled on the ground a few yards away, its doors opening with a soft hiss. Aaron tensed, ready to act if it turned out to be a trap, but Astra's hand on his arm reassured him. From the open doorway emerged a tall figure clad in simple, functional armor, its design elegant and minimalistic. The figure removed its helmet, revealing a face with the same iridescent green skin as Astra's and striking violet eyes. His expression was a mix of relief and urgency as he locked eyes with Astra. "Astra," he called out, his voice filled with both command and warmth. Astra stepped forward, her markings brightening as she smiled, the relief evident in her posture. "Raylos," she greeted him, her voice softened by familiarity. "You came." Raylos gave a sharp nod, his eyes darting around the clearing as if checking for threats. "We received your message. It was risky. Phelan will have tracked it." His gaze shifted to Aaron, studying him with a guarded expression. "And this is?" Astra placed a hand on Aaron's shoulder, her voice filled with gratitude. "This is Aaron. He has saved me, protected me." Raylo's face softened, and he inclined his head in respect. "Then we owe you a great debt, Aaron. Astra is vital to our people." Aaron nodded, the gravity of the situation settling over him. "I'm just glad she has allies who made it here safely. The Phelan soldiers are still searching the area. We need to keep moving." Raylos nodded, his expression grim. The Phalan won't give up easily, but we've come prepared. He gestured to his craft. This vessel is equipped with stealth technology. It can shield us for a time, but the Phalan fleet will detect us if we stay in one place for too long. Astra's eyes darkened, her resolve hardening. Then we must use this time wisely. We cannot simply hide and wait. Raylos met her gaze, and a hint of a smile played at the corner of his mouth. You speak like the future queen you were born to be, Astra. Aaron noticed the slight tension in Astra's expression, and he felt a pang of empathy. She had never expressed a desire to lead, but it was clear her people expected her to step into that role. She seemed to sense his thoughts and offered him a reassuring nod before turning back to Raylos. What options do we have? She asked, her voice laced with determination. Raylos glanced around the clearing, his brow furrowing in thought. The Phalan forces are likely coordinating with their central command. If we can reach their communication hub on Earth and disrupt their signals, we could delay their pursuit long enough for us to escape undetected. Aaron's eyes widened as the implications sank in. Their communication hub. Are you saying we have to infiltrate a Phalan base? Raylos nodded, his expression resolute. Precisely. It's dangerous, but it may be our only chance. Aaron looked at Astra, worry flickering in his gaze, but she met his eyes with unwavering resolve. If it means freedom from Phalan, we must try. He took a deep breath, accepting the risk. They had come too far to turn back now. All right, he said, his voice steady. What's the plan? Raylos motioned for them to enter the craft, and they climbed inside, the interior sleek and streamlined, with dim lights casting a soft glow over the control panels. Once inside, Raylos activated a screen displaying a map of the area, highlighting a red dot that marked the location of the Phalan communication hub. The hub is heavily guarded, but it's situated near a range of hills, Raylos explained, pointing to a series of ridges on the map. If we approach from the south, we can use the terrain to mask our approach. Once inside, we'll need to locate the central relay and disable it. That should give us a window to escape. Aaron studied the map, memorizing the layout. It would be a tough mission, requiring precision and stealth, but he felt a surge of confidence knowing they had a plan. And now, with Raylos on their side, their chances seemed stronger. They moved swiftly, the craft skimming low over the forest, its engines quiet as they approached the ridge. The Phalan communication hub soon came into view, a tall, sleek structure rising from the valley below, surrounded by a perimeter of patrol lights. The facility looked ominous, its design both intimidating and alien, a stark reminder of the power the Phalan Empire wielded. Raylos landed the craft a safe distance away, and they exited, moving quickly under the cover of darkness. Astra took the lead, her posture tense but confident, her every step sure and silent. Aaron and Raylos followed closely, each of them alert to the faintest sound. The closer they got, the more his adrenaline surged, sharpening his senses and clearing his mind. As they approached the facility's edge, Raylos gestured to a small access panel set into the wall. "This is the emergency entrance," he whispered. "If we can bypass the security system, we'll gain access without triggering the alarms." Astra stepped forward, her fingers deftly working over the panel. Her markings glowed brighter as she tapped a sequence into the device, her alien technology seamlessly interacting with the Phalans. The panel beeped softly, and the door slid open with a quiet hiss. They slipped inside, moving through dimly lit corridors lined with strange, humming machinery and alien symbols that Aaron couldn't decipher. Every sound, every shadow seemed to hold a threat, but they pressed forward, their footsteps light as they made their way deeper into the facility. Finally, they reached a large, circular room at the center of the complex. In the middle stood a massive terminal, pulsing with an eerie green light. It was the heart of the Phalan's communication network, the source of their coordination. Astra glanced at Raylos, who nodded, motioning for her to proceed. She approached the terminal, her fingers hovering over the controls, hesitating for only a moment. Then, with a swift movement, she began entering commands, her markings flaring brightly as she interfaced with the Felon technology. The green light intensified, and a hum filled the room as the terminal systems began to overload. Suddenly, an alarm blared through the facility, red lights flashing as security systems sprang to life. Aaron's heart pounded, and he instinctively raised his weapon, scanning the room for any signs of incoming guards. "They've detected us," Raylos shouted. "We need to move now." Astra didn't pause, her focus unwavering as she continued to disable the network, her fingers flying over the controls with a speed Aaron could barely comprehend. The machinery around them vibrated, and with a final command, the terminal let out a high-pitched whine before going dark. "It's done," Astra cried, her face flushed with triumph. "Their communications are down." But as she turned toward them, the door burst open, and a squad of Felon soldiers stormed in, weapons drawn and aimed. Aaron fired instinctively, his shot catching one of the soldiers, who crumpled to the ground. Raylos pulled Astra behind him, shielding her as he returned fire, each shot precise and lethal. The firefight was intense, the air thick with the sound of weapons discharging and the flash of energy bolts. Aaron moved quickly, covering their retreat as they backed out of the room, every muscle in his body tense as he fired and dodged incoming shots. Raylos took point, his movements fluid and controlled, leading them back through the winding corridors. They reached the emergency exit, bursting out into the cool night air, and sprinted toward the ridge where the craft was hidden. The Felon soldiers pursued them, but with their communication disrupted, they struggled to coordinate their attack. Aaron could hear their shouts growing fainter as they reached the craft and climbed inside. Raylos activated the controls, and the craft lifted off, shooting into the sky as they left the Felon facility behind. They flew in silence, each of them catching their breath, the reality of their escape slowly sinking in. Astra leaned back, her eyes closed, a smile of relief breaking across her face. "We did it," she murmured, her voice filled with quiet triumph. Aaron looked at her, his own smile forming as he felt the weight of their victory. "You did it," he replied, the admiration in his voice unmistakable. Raylos glanced back at them, a proud smile on his face. "The Phelan Empire will be slower to hunt you now, and with any luck, this will buy enough time for our people to reach Earth." As they flew into the night, leaving the Phelan Empire's reach behind, Aaron felt a profound sense of hope take root within him. They had won a small victory, but it was enough to spark the beginning of something much larger, a resistance that would defy the Empire's control and fight for freedom. And in that moment, Aaron knew that he would stand beside Astra for as long as it took, no matter the cost.